look at the process of like, the isolation, the fire, her sewing this thing, obviously probably leaking magical fluids or whatever you want to call it into the thing itself. Like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just face right now.
Okay, we just discussed that Amelie gave birth to Annie in this moment, and then you said the liquids of magic? What? Why? Why? Tell me why those are the words you chose.
I apologize. Welcome to Casuals of Runeterra, episode 83. I'm your host, Ryan, here with your other host, Hedge.
New cards! Yes!
You heard it here first. So we're still in I think we're past the leak point. Cards are actually coming out, or they have come out. We've been playing with them. But we're still going through, some stories here, some bios here, some housekeeping here, and it's up top. So you can listen to us everywhere, housekeeping. You can send an email to us if you want to contact us, podcastcore@gmail.com. Visit us at podcastcore.com for all of our info, and then follow us on any platform you prefer, or all the platforms, because that helps with discoverability. Go ahead and toss us a YouTube follow too, why not? But leave us a like, comment, short review, telling us what you like about the episodes, which ones you like best, the usual stuff. But the easiest way to spread the word is to tell a friend to let their inner flame shine bright by listening to the Casuals of Runeterra podcast.
Yes, set your friends on fire.
Wait, that's not what I said.
Wait, hold on.
So if you haven't figured out yet, or by the title of the episode, we're talking about Annie. Firestarter is the name of this episode. It's a little reference for you readers out there. So let's start. Let's just talk about it, because we got a good bit. We got a little bit of extra content here too, and some other things we want to talk about towards the end about, more focused on Annie, the school she goes to, the other kids around her outside of her bio, etc. We won't go into all the cards because we want to save that for some story stuff, which, we like to give you guys some story content here and there. So we'll save that for that. But we're going to talk about the spell. So
them casual boys sure do love their lore.
We'll find any excuse to keep talking about it. There will never be a final episode.
We're just going to start writing our own fan fiction if we get to a point of final episode.
Start lying to you.
If we write it first, it's officially canon.
And then try to sue Riot. All right, so the spell we're starting off with is one that was revealed when Annie was revealed, which is Disintegrate. So Disintegrate as a card is a 2-cost fast spell that has pick a unit. The next time it takes damage this round, kill it. So this is the equivalent of like marking a unit and then doing something to it, right? Unfortunately, when you have these type of abilities in card games, they're not great unless the following ability goes above and beyond, because it requires a follow-up action to actually do something. So you're spending 2, and then hopefully your follow-up action works and your opponent doesn't shake their way out of it to essentially ditch away that 2 cost you paid. It could be fine as a one-of in some decks that we're seeing these days for big targets, because you don't really have options to deal with them in Annie decks. So we may see it there.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to keep seeing like a little bit of play because of the fact that it is in Noxus. So a lot of people are putting together that you can, combine this with Blade's Edge.
Yeah.
And for the most things, it's going to be like 3 mana, kill a unit.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, if you're building your deck to do that, that means you're 2-for-1ing yourself.
Yeah.
So it is very much a fringe thing. Like I think metas can really define whether this card's going to be good or not. Because if we transition to something that's like heavy with Swain, like Swain's got that big old dumpy, so it's a lot easier to just do this little 2-card combo to get rid of him. But it's a cool little card. But why do we want to talk about it?
Well, the quote. Now, the quote on here is the important part. So the quote says, Headmistress Telsey spoke at length about the Noxian tenets, leaving the children before her increasingly bored and restless. But while most students largely contained their outburst, Annie acted. First with smoke, then with fire. Yeah, she gets bored easily, and that's not good. You can't let her get bored.
And if you're interested as far as with how smoke and fire come into play, just open up the card art.
Yeah, yeah. It has that childlike wonderment to it of her just goofing around with something that's very, very dangerous.
Oh yeah, so wonderfully dangerous and on someone's clothes.
Yeah, yeah. So this takes us to our follower, which we chose for this one, the Prefect. So the Prefect is a 3-cost 1/3 with Overwhelm that says when you play a fast spell, slow spell, or a skill, grant me +1/+0. Now, from the card game aspect, it's neat, but this is also not that great of a card. Because once again, you're paying a lot for it, like 3 for a 1/3 that you have to then invest more into, but can easily be removed is not that great. If you think about, I know we're thinking about like Faded Champions, where the Faded Champions all have stat lines and things that make them very difficult to deal with. So when you're building Voltron style or trying to pump them up in other ways, you get the benefit. But the Prefect, the moment it starts to become a problem, they're going to get rid of it, right? And then your investments are gone. This is kind of the same problem you're seeing currently with Annie, is that you have to get things going with those styles of cards.
Yeah, like, and this is also dependent on just, the idea that the card's going to last.
Yes.
And the if you were building around the idea that a card's going to last, you're just ignoring your opponent. You're assuming that your opponent's not going to interact with you, and that's not a healthy way to build cards or to build a deck. I think like this card would be better if it was more like I can't remember the name of the card for the life of me. I think it's something Reckoner. But it's that 5-drop that's a 4/4, and it gets +2/+2 for all the times that you've stunned or recalled units.
Yeah.
Which that it counts retroactively.
Yes.
Like when you play it's going to count how many times you've done that, and bam, you get the stats. Whereas this one, it's got to see it.
Yeah.
And that makes it, we've all learned this with the Yasuo decks, with the Fey Blade Twirler, of just like, kill the Fey Blade Twirler before it gets too big.
True. That's a great way to put it. And, with this one, obviously we're here for a reason, is the quote. So the quote's from Headmistress Telsey, which we mentioned in the earlier card, which it says, many of the children are of an age where their natural inclinations lead them to rebel against formal direction. Fortunate, then, that the eldest of them is both favored by the rest and malleable to our cause. If the students choose to ignore our lessons, then we will teach through her. And they're referring to the Prefect, which in the art is really cool because Annie's in this art. And we know how Annie's always getting up to little hijinks here and there. So to see her facing off against the Prefect just reinforces what the Headmistress is saying here. But it's also great art because as we talk more about this in the next card I get into, you'll see that where Annie ends up in Noxus is kind of like a New Mutant style school, which is a kind of neat aside to have. Because it fits very well with all the stuff of magic we've talked about up to this point. So timeline-wise, when Hetch gets into like the main story stuff, you'll see where this falls between like the Vladimir blood magic, the Black Rose stuff, all that shenanigans that is Noxus consistently.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself, so I'm just gonna jump to the card that you've got. So what? So we actually have a landmark this time. Tell us about the landmark.
Yeah, so as Hetch mentioned about the cards that have retroactive value, this is a great example of that. So Raven Bloom Conservatory, we have as a 1-cost landmark that has countdown 10, and then it says create a tie bulk in hand. I advance 1 round for each fast spell, slow spell, or skill you've played this game. So this is a card where it's good on one, it's good the rest of the game because your deck is doing these things, and the moment you play it later in the game, you get the effect.
You know, I had just mentioned that things that count retroactively
Yeah.
are really good. This is one of those things.
Yeah.
And not to mention that the payoff is the Tybok. And the Tybok is a 6/6 with Overwhelm for 6 mana. But the real reason to play it is when I'm summoned, grant allies everywhere +1/+0 for the rest of the game.
Yep.
And all of your spells and skills deal 1 extra damage. So, like, the payoff is huge here. And so, just that alone makes it worthwhile to play. And the fact that you're retroactively counting everything, like, this card is incredible. I am already trying to build horrible decks around it because I have a problem.
So we get a good quote here on this card, which is what we always care about, which is actually like a post-mortem. We have by now, word has no doubt reached you of the Rosengard Academy's dismal failure. I expect you will learn from your sister's school's failings. I expect you will manage your facility in a manner that benefits the Empire. And it's from a scorched letter found in the conservatory's rubble. Now, I don't know if when it says your sister's school, if it's referring to the headmistress that we mentioned, Telsey. I think this is a continuation of that through plot, and this letter is referencing another magi, witch, whatever you want to call them, that's starting up a school at another location.
Yeah, like I definitely think it is like another startup because I mean, we're finding this letter in the remains of said place, and then it doesn't really kind of fit to think that this is Headmistress Telsey when we read like onto Tybalt here, because then we have the quote, which is, "It burns in me, this dark presence, it whispers to me, fire, fire, in the flames I see its eyes, black and unblinking, staring, smiling, urging me to step in, urging me to join the rest, silhouettes of the inferno reaching out, come home, come home." And the remains of a decrepit Knockmacarian diary.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think this is the headmistress or the school that Annie's at, because I think everybody went home to the fire.
Well, you mean home, you like heaven, right? Like,
I mean somewhere. Like if we're going off of like the Christian heaven, I don't think they deal with fire there. I think the Christians have a very different idea of fire in the afterlife.
So tell us about Annie. Let's just get into it. The child, the Firestarter.
Yeah, so this was a lot of fun for me to go back and read on, because I was telling Ryan before we got to recording that I didn't remember anything about Annie's lore. And when we get into it, it'll kind of make sense because it is very relatable to other stories. But we do get with this remake of her story, like some little points that are very important to us as far as on this show. And one of the things that's very important to keep talking about, since we are talking about a champion from Noxus, we've got to mention Borum Darkwill. Like, we can't talk about Noxus without Borum Darkwill, because Borum Darkwill, in his madness, set up the Noxus that we know today.
Yeah.
And luckily we don't have to talk about him too much, because the setting for this story is that we are following a lot of sorcerers, sorceresses, a lot of magic users fleeing the nation of Noxus. And it's because Borum Darkwill's lost his mind for the pursuit of immortality.
Yep.
And this means that he's going to try to contact like anyone that has any knowledge of magic to try to put it together. And there's no telling if you're going to make it out of that alive. So for the sake of our story, we're going to follow Gregory the Grey, who is a powerful sorcerer, and his wife, a witch by the name of Emmeline. So Gregory and Emmeline, they are fleeing Noxus, but all they do is flee the city. They are too proud as far as a family of well-renowned sorcerers
Yeah.
within the nation of Noxus. They're too proud to actually full out leave Noxus. So what they do is they just flee into the forests beyond the Iron Spike Mountains. So they're heading north of the city of Noxus while still within its territory. And they're doing what is, showing our age on the show a little bit. It's our dream, which is to flee all of civilization and build yourself a cabin out in the middle of nowhere. If only we could afford it. But Gregory and Ameline, they can't afford it. So they are out in the mountains. They are able to build themselves a home out in the middle of nowhere. And the only things that we get mentioned here is that there are a lot of bears and a lot of wildlife in this forest. It's very dangerous, but they're able to set up their home before winter hits and before Ameline gives birth, because at this point she is very much pregnant.
Yeah.
And it is after building this new home for themselves and settling down for the winter that Ameline, while sitting in front of the fireplace, is knitting a teddy bear for the daughter that she is about to give birth to. And she gives birth to Annie in front of a roaring fire while finishing this teddy bear that she is made for Annie. So we now have Annie entering the world in front of a fire with a teddy bear. If you know Annie from the League of Legends game, these are all very symbolic things.
So I want to mention that this setup, I mean, you have two powerful mages that are having a child. You're immediately going to think this child's going to have latent abilities. And then you look at the process of, like, the isolation, the fire, her sewing this thing, obviously probably leaking magical fluids or whatever you want to call it into the thing itself. Like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just face right now.
Like, okay, we just discussed that Ameline gave birth to Annie in this moment, and then you said the liquids of magic? What? Why? Why? Tell me why those are the words you chose.
I apologize. But it's the perfect setup. It's the perfect setup for a magic child. Like, this is what you're gonna get.
That is officially the grossest teddy bear on the planet. And it's because of your words. Oh my Lord. But yeah, like I think it is important to, realize how powerful her parents are. And then, like, with the further we get in the story, they're both kind of dumb.
Yes.
And it's because neither of these parents are like, yeah, Annie's gonna have some latent abilities. No, they both just ignore it completely. Yeah. So let's talk about them ignoring this, because we get to a point as far as the next milestone in Annie's life is when she was a toddler. Both her and Gregory become very sick. And so they're both running a fever. The fevers are getting dangerously high. There's a point where Ameline comments that she couldn't hold Annie because she was too hot to the touch.
Which is insane.
Which she's like, this is a normal fever. No, woman, your child has magical abilities because you're a witch and her father's a sorcerer. Don't be dumb. But unfortunately for our story here, and unfortunately for Annie, her mom is dumb. So she goes out to just try to fetch water to help Gregory and Annie with their fevers.
Yeah.
And she never returns. So what we end up, as far as this reveal that she never returns, is that Gregory wakes up. He's still feeling a little, under the weather, but Annie is totally fine.
Yeah. Playing
with her teddy bear, but Ameline's nowhere to be seen. And it is from this point on that Gregory is raising Annie alone, and would comment that Annie would sit on the front porch waiting for Ameline to come home, despite the fact that it has now been years without seeing Ameline. And every time that she would sit there waiting for her mom to come home, he would remark that the fire would start roaring and he wouldn't even remember starting the fire.
Yeah.
And he's just like, oh, I didn't think I started a fire, but now it's really big and roaring. This is just the stress of being a single dad.
Classic.
By no means could this mean that my child has magical abilities.
So the additional little tidbit here is this is the first layer of the ambiguity we have with Annie and something bad happening. Where did Annie do something to her mother because her father has no idea, or did life take its course, right? Because they are in the middle of fucking nowhere.
Yeah, and we at the beginning of the story, it's remarked how dangerous these forests are.
Yeah.
With wildlife and just like unknown dangers. So it's very easy to say that it's like Ameline did get lost in the forest. It's also very easy to say that, she's a powerful witch. Ameline probably went and did her own thing.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know a lot about her story, but the constant ignorance of how much fire is around Annie with her two magic parents is just wild to me. All right. So
listen, Hatch, when you love to grill and you get yourself a brand new Traeger, it's going to be fire.
This episode is brought to you by oh my Lord. So yeah, like it's wild to me. So during this time, Gregory is just struggling to be a single dad. So all Annie really has to herself is Tibbers.
Yeah.
So she's cradling Tibbers, waiting for mom to come home. So who ends up coming home? A young woman named Liana and her daughter Daisy. All right. So Gregory finds new love. Gregory is now actively trying to move on from this, this tragedy in his life.
Yeah.
And Annie is on board with it to a certain degree because Daisy's about her age.
Yeah.
And now being out in the middle of nowhere, alone with dad and sad about mom, is now replaced by having a playmate.
Yeah.
And so Annie is on board, but Annie does have this, very quick anger that erupts within her because she's been an only child. She hasn't had to share her things or anything like that. And this is something that is, is essential to every child growing up. We've all had to learn to share, but it is difficult for Annie because her new stepmom, Liana, is always choosing Daisy's side.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, is skewed against Annie at this point, but it is a lesson that Annie has to learn. And this all boils to a head when Daisy is out playing in the forest and catastrophe strikes. These forests are very dangerous. So something kills Daisy. We don't know what.
Once again, we somehow do not know what.
And then once again, it could be anything. But definitely not this latent magical ability that is clearly welling up in this child born from two magic users. All right. Now, that being said, with this catastrophe happening, Liana does blame Annie.
Yeah.
And we do know that it is out playing in the forest, and this is Annie's playmate. So it's like, hey, why didn't you defend my child? Or
Yeah.
why didn't you warn my child about where you were playing? You know this area better than Daisy. And through this grief and this very difficult time, Liana ends up taking it out on Annie. So now we've got like this evil stepmother situation. And Annie, for the most part, does kind of deal with it up until the point that in one of these, tragic breakdowns that Liana's suffering, she takes Tibbers away from Annie. So this doll that was sewn by a powerful witch, given to powerful witch's daughter, covered in magic juices.
Oh, come on.
Is taken from this child that randomly has fire appear around her at all times and has clearly been showing issues with sharing.
This is also important because it says, she takes out her grief on Tibbers as well. So we now know, just from, what we know in the game, you see Tibbers is physically kind of tattered in the game that we know it. We now know who fucked up Tibbers as like the bear form, the small little teddy bear form. It was most likely the stepmother who was taking that kind of rage out on the doll.
Yep. And just to tell you what happens at this point, I'm just going to read it verbatim. So, Annie was horrified as the last physical memory of her mother was threatened. The girl's terror grew to an unbridled rage, releasing her latent and powerful pyromancy, and the stuffed bear was brought to life in a maelstrom of protective fire. When the flames died down and the swirl of ash settled, Annie was left orphaned and alone. So, yeah, it turns out that this child, born of powerful mages, who is randomly, constantly surrounded by fire, has a very powerful relationship with pyromancy. Who would have thunk?
No, Hetch. The most important part here is the statement orphaned, because we're in Noxus. And we know all good stories involve orphans.
Yeah, let's give Riot their due here. Thank God we didn't have the opening line, "Orphan on the street." No. No, Annie had to work to get there, all right? Annie had to put in the work.
It's one thing, we never give them their credit. I think, and obviously listeners, we've done a lot of episodes. Correct us if we're wrong. I don't think we've done Amnesia yet. I'll give them that. I think
that's true. I don't think we've done Amnesia yet.
We've done Orphaned a good bit, and we'll continue to rag on them for that. But we haven't done Amnesia. So until then, still top scores
all around. And from this point, like the story kind of like, wraps up for Annie, because we get to a point where Annie is alone, but she is now under the assumption that people from the city of Noxus are all like Liana.
Yes.
Who is this woman that threatened Tibbers, so she got burned alive.
Mm-hmm.
So Annie's like, I'm not dealing with that. So she just wanders throughout the forests that she calls her home. And she continues wandering throughout these forests, only meeting up with people out in the wilderness. So, mountain folk like her parents.
Yeah.
And would only stay with them long enough to get, some new clothes and a hot meal, and then go out and wander the wilderness again. And she does this completely oblivious of the danger that she's in, while also being completely oblivious to the protection that she has.
Yeah.
So all the stuff that's dangerous out there and can kill her, yeah, technically it can kill a small child, but it's all way too terrified of her, because they can sense how much magic is just swirling around her at all times. And she is kept safe by Tibbers. She wanders the forest of Noxus, hoping one day to find someone who she can play with. And that's where her bio kind of ends. We don't get a look into her school life at this point of the story. This is just how she starts.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those cases of her age. Like, it'll be very interesting. So we don't know, like with the Arcane series, how they're going to handle age moving forward. So we have the time jump in Arcane and stuff like that. So we get to see the characters grow up and change. But with a character like Annie, who is one of the younger characters in the cast, because of her obliviousness, because of her age, but her insane amount of power and being in Noxus, it would be very interesting to see what she's like as a teenager. Because a lot of her experiences now are almost like a child with a rocket launcher, right? She doesn't know rocket launchers are dangerous. She doesn't know how powerful they are and what they can cause. But she sees it as a toy, and that's a problem, right? So
yeah,
when she learns responsibility,
if I pull this trigger, really fun sounds happen.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be a neat concept to kind of get some insight into down the line, hopefully.
Yeah, it would be fun, but this wouldn't be complete until we talk about the card.
Yep.
And um the card has been live only for about like a week,
Yeah.
2 weeks now.
At the time of
As far as
recording. Yeah.
reveal when we're recording this, but it is a menace to society in a lot of
Yeah.
regards. But I think they did a really good job as far as the design with it. So we've got Annie, a 1 mana 0/2. All right. So a 1 mana 0/2, and she has a attack skill. So when I attack, I deal 2 damage to my blocker. If it's dead or gone, I deal 2 damage to the enemy Nexus instead. And her level up condition is I have seen you play 6+ fast spells, slow spells, or skills. So, the attack skill is similar to like the Jin level up condition. Um, Unlike Jin, she has to see it, but I think like what we've been seeing as far as with this card is that most of the really good anti decks, you're not playing to level her up. You're playing because there's no one drop in the game that can trade with it on the attack. You're doing this for face damage, but her level up is so much fun. All right, so we've got her becoming a 1 mana 1/3. Now the attack portion is I deal 3 damage to my blocker and stun it.
Yeah.
So if they block with something that can survive that 3 damage, it's still not going to hit Annie. There's no trading with Annie in combat if she's attacking.
Yeah.
And then if it's dead or gone, I deal 3 damage to the enemy Nexus instead. But when I level up, create Tibbers in hand. And Tibbers is a 6 mana 5/5 with Fearsome. On the play, stun an enemy, then deal 2 damage to all stunned or damaged enemies. So if you are trying to build a deck around playing, like leveling up Annie, the Tibbers drop can be a lot of fun, but it really is a thing of like both sides of Annie's cards are so different from each other that it really makes a lot of fun deck building puzzles. Like, do you want to play to try to level up Annie? Because then, like, if you're trying to do that, that's much more of a control style of play, where the payoff is more the play condition of Tibbers and not Tibbers itself. And then the aggro style of play is like, yeah, like she's very aggressive. No one drop can trade with her, but you're not going to level her up. You're not going to level up. You're just trying to take 20 HP down to 0. So this is really cool design just as far as deck building solely.
Yeah, they nailed it. They took a lot of things from other champs they've done in the past on how she interacts, making her unique to herself, and then embodying the card very well. But the greatest thing about these cards is there are a lot of cards that add, good flavor to the world with their quotes, but this one actually has information that we're looking for from, as Hetch mentioned during the story, like we don't know a lot about Amelin, right? We don't know a lot about a lot of things, but these cards actually tell us.
Yep. So let's dive into that real quick, because the quotes are like, there's a lot of information here. So on the front side, we've got, over a decade ago, Ameline Kiosar fled the Ravenbloom Conservatory with an invaluable and incandescent asset in her control. Ravenbloom's scouts searched for her in every corner of the Empire, but none of the rumors they heard led them to Ameline. And so, years later, when news arrived of a lost girl burning with rage in the northern Iron Spike Mountains, Finn Retrick reluctantly gathered his things and left to investigate. He expected to find nothing. How wrong he was. I just love, too, that, like, her parents were so ignorant of her abilities that it borderlines on frustrating.
Yeah.
And then even after that, it's like, you are going to investigate rumors of people just getting set on fire. And you're like, I'm not going to find anything. Why are people just so ignorant of Annie. It blows my mind. But then we get to the other side of her card, and it's a direct quote from a letter that Finn Retrick wrote. I found her. She's Ameline's, no doubt. Same eyes, same giggle. I'll bring her back within the fortnight. Having spoken to the girl, I ask that you be kind to her. I believe there's good in there, along with the dark. So at the very least, Finn Retrick kind of figures out, hey, I shouldn't be this ignorant about Annie.
Yeah.
There's something going on here. But we now kind of have like some answers as far as like with Ameline and why she wanted to flee Noxus. Because in the bio, all we've got is that, Borm Darkwill's lost his damn mind. But Ameline did something.
Yeah.
We just don't know what.
And the fact that we now know Gregory is also probably ignorant of Ameline's past, right? He probably didn't know her when she was in the conservatory, but I just met her afterwards and didn't know what she was doing then and what she was up to. There's a possibility, like we see this in a lot of movies with possessions, right? Where somebody's possessed by something due to a circumstance where they got involved in something they weren't supposed to. And now her disappearance still has that mystique of it to, okay, wait, was it Annie? Or did she, lose her mind and wander off into the wilderness? Is she still alive? She's done this before where she's run away. So that's the kind of storytelling where it's like, okay, now this is getting juicier.
And speaking of getting juicier, like one of the reasons that we're taking so much time with this is that like there's a lot of questions around Annie, and these cards give us a lot of information. So when we look at Tibbers,
yep.
So the quote on Tibbers is, the demon Tybalt had infested the minds of countless victims over the centuries. Slowly, inexorably, he would lead them to the fire and watch his flames feast on scorched flesh. But in young Annie, Tybalt found a will completely indomitable and a talent for magic that rivaled even his own.
Yep.
So we know that Tybalt now is like a demon
Yep.
that has been around for a long time. We know that Tybalt took pleasure in basically eating on the followers of that he would create, because he would enthrall them and to a point until they came home. But Annie is strong enough to kind of, compete with him while also being Annie, completely oblivious to the danger that she's in, completely oblivious to the fact that this is a demon trying to consume her. She just wants to play.
It's crazy what you can do when your parents are magic wielders.
Look, if you're listening to this and like you've got some secrets into the magic world, like, somehow all this crap is real. All right. And you find someone that, this crap is real for them too, and y'all have a kid, just check them out. Just check them out. It's as easy as that.
Have you ever seen that Planned Parenthood? I think it's Planned Parenthood, like advertisement from back in the day that said 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, I remember that.
This reminds me of that. And forgive me if I have if it's the wrong thing. But because like one magic user plus one magic user gives you 3 times the power is the way I look at it. And that kind of enforces what we're seeing here. But like we mentioned at the beginning with these cards, this is like those 3 stories on those cards alone are their own excerpt, right? Like,
oh yeah,
this is one of those stories. We always compliment Riot's writing on a lot of this stuff. And for Annie, she's an original character, OG. She's had a bit of changes over the past, but the way this story is handled, it's very simple to start off. And the deeper you go, and then it leaves you off. And then we pick up with these cards because Legends of Runeterra comes out a decade later. That then pushes you further down that path. And we still have a story for you guys at some point. So there's a lot more here where we're not saying Annie's a bad story. It's just give it time to breathe, and it gets really good.
Oh yeah, and like this is one of those things where for Ryan and I, we've given this a lot of time to breathe.
Yeah,
one of the reasons this has been so enjoyable for me is because it was a very standard rip off of Stephen King in the beginning, and now it's really it's growing into a story of all its own and is growing into something that I want to know more about.
Yeah.
Like that's really, as fans of lore, that's all we can ask for. If you give us something that we want to dive deeper into,
Yeah.
that's a win. And this is nothing but wins coming out of Riot's corner when it comes to Annie and the cards they dropped for her.
Yeah, I'm definitely hoping for this to kind of go. So, when I talked about Annie getting older, because if you look at the art, go look at the art of these cards, by the way, because in the art for Annie, it's a lot of shots of her at the conservatory with these other kids who have their own abilities, and some of them are cards now, which we'll talk about in later episodes. But it's cool because I definitely think we get like a New Mutant style, conservatory gets blown up, the whole Noxus classic, unstableness of everything, and these kids go out to start their own thing because a lot of them have their own mischievous backgrounds and their own behaviors that line up with Annie. And as we remember, Annie's just looking for people like her and friends because she's a toddler, right? She's young kid who just wants to find somewhere to belong. So finding these other kids who are also looking for that same thing, there's something there. You get your New Mutant story for free, Riot.
And if you contact us at podcastcore@gmail.com, we're more than willing to help, flesh out the details. We got this.
Yeah. So this has been a long one. So thanks for sticking around if you're still here. And as always, thanks for listening. And we'll be back soon with the next episode.
Take care, everybody.